BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, today is Wednesday, another Ripper Wednesday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Wednesdays this year, I've been talking to you guys about Jack the Ripper, perhaps the world's most famous unsolved mystery. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about Jack the Ripper. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. Jack the Ripper was a serial killer that operated in England in 1888. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And in this episode, I will be responding to the video Jack the Ripper, The Forgotten Five, made by Debunk File. And this is one where I'm not sure if this is going to be a very long Ripper Wednesday or a very short Ripper Wednesday. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I had a completely different topic lined up, but because I watch lots of Jack the Ripper content on YouTube, there was this recommended video called Jack the Ripper, The Forgotten Five from Debunk File, and I knew that I was going to get fired up about this. I just knew from the title, but I decided to watch it anyway. And again, it's going to be discussing the way that people respond to the Jack the Ripper mystery. And I'm going to play an introductory clip from this video from Debunk File, and then let's have a discussion about it. And as always, you can put your ideas in the comment section down below. I would love to know what you guys think.
Hi, and welcome to Debunk File. My name is Sep, and today we're going to talk about Jack the Ripper, the most famous serial killer in history. It's a name that sadly doesn't need an introduction. Just saying that name conjures up images of a silent stalker in a top hat and cape, supposedly murdering prostitutes for entertainment. This man turned the autumn of 1888 from a faded memory to an immortal time of terror. This isn't a true crime buff, London historian, or law enforcement officer alive who hasn't heard about the demon of Whitechapel. For those who study serial killers, there is a clear pre-Ripper era and post-Ripper era. Little was the same when the year ended. Talking about the Ripper's legacy is difficult because it's so vast. He's so talked about that there's actually a term for people that study him called Ripperology. Usually the thing we do here is mention the countless pieces of media he's in, but really that isn't even necessary this time around. Instead, we have a different question to ask, and that is, can you name a single victim of his in this case? Do you know the people that were unfortunately taken from the spree? Do you simply refer to them as common prostitutes and move on? When you hear the term Jack the Ripper, do you think of a genius, superhuman fiend? For this haunted night, we will answer all of these questions and more. On this night, we will talk at great length about London's most legendary boogeyman.
And once again, that video was from the Debunk File. The full title is Jack the Ripper, The Forgotten Five. Now, as you see, they have asked some challenge questions to the viewer. And you guys who follow Black Box Online Radio know that I cannot resist challenge questions. So the first one is, can you name the victims who were murdered by Jack the Ripper? The women who were murdered by Jack the Ripper, have they been forgotten? Well, yes, of course we can name them. Firstly, there was the murder of Polly Nichols that occurred on August 31st of 1888. Then there was the murder of Annie Chapman, which occurred on September 8th. On September 30th, there was the double event, which saw the deaths of Liz Stride first and then Catherine Eddowes. And then on November 9th of 1888, there was the murder of Mary Kelly. But I think that there's just something that's so much more powerful. And one of the reasons why I wanted to make this episode for you guys on Ripper Wednesday was, who has decided that these women have been forgotten? Who has decided that these women are not talked about? Who has decided that these women are neglected by history, neglected by Ripperology, neglected by people who follow the true crime world? Because if you watch any Jack the Ripper documentary, They talk about the victims. They talk about the names of the victims. They are discussed very frequently, and they're presented in a positive light. Or at the very least, in some documentaries, they might be presented in a neutral light. And the same goes for the plethora of Jack the Ripper books out there, but this isn't some grand secret or something that the women are people who are never discussed. The women who were murdered by Jack the Ripper are discussed countless times and very frequently in sources all across the Ripperological spectrum. Ripperological. We don't get to say that word enough. And there are some other things that I would like to bring up for you guys in this one, because it's not only the canonical victims who were murdered by Jack the Ripper, the Forgotten Five. There's also the murder of Emma Smith that took place on April 3rd of 1888, which is regarded as the first Whitechapel murder. Then on August 7th, there's the murder of Martha Tabram, sometimes pronounced Tabram, and she is a victim thought by many to have actually been murdered by Jack the Ripper, whereas I believe that the majority of people think that Emma Smith was not. Again, these women are widely discussed, frequently discussed in these historical contexts. And another reason why I wanted to make this episode was I think there are people who are forgotten, or at the very least, not discussed very frequently. And you can't even say the word forgotten because we're going to be discussing them in this episode, but I'll explain a little bit as time goes by. And for example, I've said many times on Ripper Wednesday that I believe that the Whitechapel murders should not begin on April 3rd of 1888. They should begin in November of 1887 with the murder of Emily Horsnell, who was quite similarly to Emma Smith. She was attacked by a London street gang, and she actually died from being assaulted in the abdominal area, something to that effect, and she passed away from her injuries later on, whereas Emma Smith was murdered in a more brutal way, and I believe she was even penetrated with a foreign object. But Emily Horsnell is someone who doesn't even have a surviving photo, to the best of my knowledge. And then there is also, how about someone like Margaret Hayes? And this is truly an instance when I had to reference the book Jack the Ripper, The Facts by Paul Begg. I had to look up her name because I had forgotten it since the most recent episode. If you want to talk about victims who have been forgotten, and Margaret Hayes was the woman who was attacked on December 8th of 1888, let me say this again. She is put into the infirmary on December 8th of 1887 after the murder of Emily Horsnell. And Margaret Hayes actually spent 20 days in the infirmary, and she was released on December 28th of 1887. So there are some theories out there that some people took this story and the story of Emma Smith, who was attacked by the street gang in a very brutal way, and again, let's just say stabbed for lack of a better term, and they put them together and they created the story of Fairy Fay. Now, Fairy Fay is someone who is thought to have been murdered on December 26th of 1887. We don't even know if that was a real person or not. So as we see, this is just well beyond, like, have people been forgotten? Or at the very least, have the women who were murdered by Jack the Ripper in the Autumn of Terror been forgotten? No, absolutely not. And I just think that it's an inappropriate and unfair statement to even insinuate that they were. And this video from Debunk File is going to heavily rely on a particular Jack the Ripper book called The Five by Hallie Rubenhold. And that is the book that is going to try and make the case that the women who were murdered by Jack the Ripper were not prostitutes, and that they should not be thought of as such. Although Hallie Rubenhold does concede that Liz Stride, the third victim, was an occasional prostitute, and Mary Kelly, the final victim, was a full-time prostitute. And my answer is, I'm not necessarily too concerned with that. No matter what they were doing, no matter what those women were doing out on the streets, that does not mean that they deserve to have been murdered by Jack the Ripper. And the second challenge question was, do you just think of these women as common prostitutes? No, I don't think so. And I think the majority of the people who follow the Jack the Ripper case also do not think that way about the Ripper victims. I think they take the stance that these women did not deserve to be murdered. They did not deserve to be mutilated. They did not deserve to be disemboweled and all of the horrible things that happened to them. And I would just end it there, full stop, because Again, you just have to read the books, you have to watch the videos, you have to watch the documentaries, and this is the way that they are being presented. Whereas there are women who are in very unfortunate circumstances, and they're also trying to comprehend the poverty of Whitechapel at the time, which is driving people to do certain things. So if Hallie Rubenhold wanted to write this book, The Five, and just be like, she wants to write the history of the women who were murdered by Jack the Ripper, she wants to create the definitive authority about the women who were murdered by Jack the Ripper, sure, more power to you. I would read it, and I would probably love it. But once this social element is thrown in about how, oh, there's this horrible perception that people have of Jack the Ripper's victims, and they've been mistreated by history, I'm just taking the stance and saying, whoa, 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 hold on there a second. Where is this idea that they've been mistreated by history? Where is this idea that people even think poorly of Jack the Ripper's victims? Who on earth has said that? I mean, I can't even remember the last time that one of you guys in the comments section here on Ripper Wednesday said something bad about the victims in just a very derogatory or negative light. I mean, I can't remember the last time that that's happened. Now, people have definitely said bad things about women in other videos on Black Box Online Radio. I talk about a lot of different stories on this channel, but about Jack the Ripper's victims? No, I can't recall a single instance. So as you see, some people are just trying to stir the pot, and if that's the whole intention of Hallie Rubenhold of The Five and Debunk File, just to get some type of reaction out of people, just to get some people talking about their material, then they have succeeded. And I knew that this was going to really get me to try and think in this particular way. And again, if that's what they wanted, they have succeeded. But there are other examples of how people try to add humanizing elements to Jack the Ripper's victims where they don't want the general public to just think about them as common prostitutes. They don't want close followers of the Jack the Ripper mystery even to just think about them as common prostitutes. And one of the books that I have very high on my reading list is David Yost's book on Elizabeth Stride and Jack the Ripper, where he wrote a book about the victim, Elizabeth Stride, Jack the Ripper's third victim. And I think that this is one that I really want to read because I think it's a very interesting choice for a book. And I've said this many times on Ripper Wednesday that perhaps the most famous and most compelling and fascinating murder, even though it's terrible but fascinating, is the murder of Mary Kelly, Jack the Ripper's final victim, who was murdered the most extensively. And then after that, the murder that's the most intriguing would be the murder of Liz Stride, the third victim, because Mary Kelly is mutilated the most intensely, and Liz Stride is mutilated the least intensely. She just has her throat slit, and she's not actually mutilated at all, to be fair. And the fact that David Yost chose to write a book about Liz Stride is something that I would really like to explore. But as you see that he's also going through this effort to try and write a historical narrative about one of Jack the Ripper's victims. And it's not just that people think about them as common prostitutes. And even if you want to add on a multi-layered discussion about this, I have a two-part book discussion about The Seduction of Mary Kelly by William J. Perry here on this channel, which I invite you to listen to, especially the second part, which has like a summary and recap of part one if you want to just jump right into it. And that's all about creating this humanizing backstory through the form of a novel about the life of Mary Kelly, so people don't just think of her as a murdered prostitute who was killed by Jack the Ripper. Once again, who is saying this? Who is saying that these women have been forgotten? Who is saying that they've been mistreated by history? Who is saying that they've only been thought of as common prostitutes? They are thought of as victims. They are thought of as human beings. And there might be a very strong emphasis about how they are presented throughout history. And, you know, there's a very ironic issue that I have because I do not show any of the post-mortem photos of the victims here on this channel, more or less, mostly. I try to avoid that because there are mortuary photos of the victims and, of course, the crime scene of Mary Kelly, but there are a couple reasons why I try to avoid showing those photos. Number one, they're very gruesome and horrific. Number two, YouTube does not take very kindly to sharing those types of photos. And number three, this is something that I think is perhaps maybe not the most meaningful, and maybe I'm not actually making a difference, but somebody once told me that by avoiding sharing content like that or showing those types of photos, you're allowing the victims to rest in peace just a little bit more. I know that a lot of people would disagree with that, but that's something that struck a chord with me, so I've kept doing it. But again, that's also about trying to be respectful to the victims and also thinking about the victims in a humane way, not just as common prostitutes. prostitutes. Once again, who is really stating this, that we don't need to investigate the Jack the Ripper mystery because the women he murdered were common prostitutes? Or who is saying this, that the women who were murdered by Jack the Ripper are not important because they were common prostitutes? And if you watch 10 Jack the Ripper documentaries, I guarantee you that the overwhelming majority of them will really talk about the victims in a very, very humane way. But that's just my take on the subject. If you can think of any exceptions, please put your ideas in the comment section down below. The majority of sources that I've discussed for Ripper Wednesday are actually very fair to the victims. Now, there was another challenge question that was thrown into this that is a little bit different. It's actually going into a different direction, but I'm responding to Debunk File's video, and that was, do you think that Jack the Ripper was some type of superhuman genius or not? And that was the final one that was posted there in the video clip. And I'm very divided on this. I'm very divided on this because we don't really know who Jack the Ripper was. And part of me thinks that it's possible that Jack the Ripper was a very well-educated medical doctor, and there's another part of me who thinks that Jack the Ripper was somebody who did not have a very strong education, but he was familiar with anatomy to a certain extent. The butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, something like that. And specifically, a butcher, I think, would fit in there. Somebody who was also very good at handling a knife, could have committed these crimes, the murders and the mutilations. So there is a very big divide, and even if somebody is a doctor, that doesn't mean that they were a genius. Now, some people think that Jack the Ripper was extremely intelligent. They think he was well-educated, medical knowledge, all of that, and he used his intelligence to escape the crime scenes. That's why he never got caught, because he had some very strong instincts. He had a very strong sense of awareness, and he also knew about how people were going to behave, so he could sneak around the back alleys of Whitechapel without getting caught. Then there's the other camp that just says that, yeah, Jack the Ripper was probably somewhat of a dumb guy, someone who had animosity toward women, someone who had internalized rage, not being a genius, no, internalized rage toward women, and he murdered these women, and he just got extremely lucky with his escapes. Maybe he was running around the back alleys of Whitechapel because he was familiar with them, or maybe he was just running around the back alleys because those were the only places to go, but he got away because he was extremely lucky, and it could easily be a combination of the both, or it could be one or the other. And it's so hard to pinpoint an exact answer on this, and I know that's an on-the-fence answer, but let's just say there is insufficient evidence to state that Jack the Ripper is some type of superhuman genius. But we've been talking about Jack the Ripper, and is there some type of difference between talking about Jack the Ripper and talking about the victims? Oh yes, absolutely. And I think what this video from Debunk File is talking about is the name Jack the Ripper more widely discussed than the victims' names? Absolutely yes as well. But here's something. This is going to sound a little bit weird, but is Jack the Ripper more famous than the victims? Not in all honesty, no. For the following reason. I'm going to ask you guys in the comment section, in the chat, in the audience of Black Box Online Radio, who was the real Jack the Ripper? Do you really know his name? If you do, please share it with us. But I don't know Jack the Ripper's real name. I mean, maybe I don't know the real names of all the victims. I know names that they use, and I've seen photos of them, and they've been identified, for lack of a better term. But do we know at all who Jack the Ripper was? And to act like Jack the Ripper in some way somehow superior to that of the victims? I don't even know Jack the Ripper's first name. I don't know what Jack the Ripper looked like. There is no reliable composite sketch of Jack the Ripper, and no, I don't accept that wood carving into a cane as actually being Jack the Ripper that came out a couple years ago that was found in the archives. I don't think that was a composite of the real Jack the Ripper. So, in many ways, Jack the Ripper is viewed in an even less humane context than the women. And I don't really have a problem with that, because Jack the Ripper was a murderous scumbag who killed and mutilated women for his own entertainment. And with that part of the Debunk File video, I do indeed agree with. And here's also a difference between Jack the Ripper and the victims. I mean, I really have to quote Richard Jones, and I do frequently, when he said that Jack the Ripper is not a who, Jack the Ripper is a what. Jack the Ripper is a name that was found on a letter that was mailed to the Central News Agency on September 27th of 1888, the Dear Boss letter. And if you do watch this Debunk File video, it's about 2 hours long, and even though I've been very critical of it, there are some points that stood out to me. For example, there's this section in the video at about the 35-minute mark that has a very dramatic reading of the Dear Boss letter, Jack the Ripper's first letter that's widely thought to have come from the killer. And I'm going to play that for you in just a second. I like their presentation of this because they had different voices coming in and out at unexpected times, and it's just something that I had never heard before. So I'm going to play a reading from the Debunk File, and they're going to share their take on the Dear Boss letter, and then we will respond.
During this time frame, when the Autumn of Terror truly began in earnest, and men patrolled the street day and night, letters started being sent to local papers and the police themselves. They were obviously fake, claiming information that was wrong or absurd motivations. Most were ignored on the spot, but one wasn't. On September 27th, the Central News Agency received a letter initially considered a hoax, before being forwarded to Scotland Yard out of curiosity 2 days later. Before that point, most newspapers referred to the killer as Leather Apron, which soon changed forever. The letter reads as follows.
Dear Boss, keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't
fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track.
The joke about Leather Apron gave me real fits. I am down on wars, and I shan't quit ripping them until I do get buckled.
Grand work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal.
How can they catch me now? Love my work and want to start again.
You'll soon hear of me with my funny little games.
I saved some of the proper red stuff in that ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with.
But it went thick like glue and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope.
Next job I do, I shall clip the ladies' ears off, send them to the police officers, just for jolly. Wouldn't you?
Keep this letter back till I do a bit more work, then give it out straight. My knife's so nice and sharp, I want to get to work right away if I get a chance.
Good luck. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Don't mind me giving the trade name. P.S. Wasn't good enough to post this before I got all the red ink off my hands, curse it.
No luck yet. They say I'm a doctor now.
And one more time, that video was from the Debunk File, The Forgotten Five, Jack the Ripper, The Forgotten Five. So I've been a little bit agitated by the earlier parts of their presentation, but I thought that that was a good dramatic reading all the same. And I would like to know, what is your response to any of the comments that I've made that overall I think that the historians and the documentarians and the writers and even the novelists have been relatively fair to the victims in the Jack the Ripper case, to the women who were murdered by Jack the Ripper. And I don't think that history has a poor presentation of them or a poor outlook about them at all. That's my take on the subject. They are viewed as victims who were innocent, who were robbed of their lives, and mostly that's where it stops. Because, of course, there are lots of details that Hallie Rubenhold has tried to uncover and really tried to popularize and share, but so have other writers, so have other ripperologists, so have other people who have explored these cases. And it is very fascinating to learn about the lives of the victims. I haven't even mentioned Win Weston Davies yet, who wrote the book The Real Mary Kelly, and I talk about his material a lot here on Black Box Online Radio. Once again, that's about someone who's exploring the story of one of the victims. And I think that that's where we're going to have to leave that particular discussion. But I do want to pick up with some things from last week's Ripper Wednesday. And if you are a newcomer to my channel, I really do this episode, or this segment, almost every Wednesday, if I can get the episode out on time. Sometimes they come out on Thursday mornings instead of Wednesdays. But last week on the channel, I was talking to you guys about the book, Jack the Ripper, Case Solved, 1889. And this is one that does not focus so much on the social issues, but rather it's talking about the suspects in the case, and it's taking a very strong stance that Montague John Druitt was Jack the Ripper. He is a widely discussed suspect, and I was thinking about using that as the source material for this week's episode because I really didn't get too deep into the book on last week's Ripper Wednesday, but as I was reading through the subsequent chapters it was way too gushy about Melville Macnaghten, Sir Melville Macnaghten, the person who wrote the Macnaghten Memorandum, which named 3 credible Jack the Ripper suspects. And I kid thee not, J.J. Hainsworth, the author of this book, Jack the Ripper Case Solved 1889, was gushing all over Melville Macnaghten, trying to make him sound like he was the greatest person in history. And I just felt that this was something that I didn't really want to explore for Ripper Wednesday, but I did come across a very particular page. And this is on a completely different note than the stories of the 5. It's just a very, very brief segment, but it's relevant to the entirety of the Jack the Ripper case. And that is that I'm reading through this book, and he says that Melville Macnaghten wrote a memorandum where he laid out the case for 3 credible suspects, or at the very least, better than laying out the case, he named 3 credible suspects. One of them is Montague John Druitt, whom I just mentioned, and another one is Michael Ostrog, also known as Mikhail Ostrog, and then there is Aaron Kosminski, one of the most famous Jack the Ripper suspects, maybe even the prime suspect in the Jack the Ripper case. And I came across this page in the book, and you know what, I'm just going to read it for you right here. This is J.J. Hainsworth's discussion on Aaron Kosminski as a Jack the Ripper suspect. Is it bullshit or not? This book will show that this suspect was a red herring, a harmless lunatic dangled by Sir Melville to deflect his indiscreet boss away from the real Jack. And the artifact in question was a shawl or tablecloth that was too expensive to belong to an East End prostitute. And this is, of course, talking about the shawl that was allegedly owned by Catherine Eddowes, or that has some type of DNA on it. But look at this sentence here. This book will show that this suspect was a red herring, a harmless lunatic dangled by Sir Melville Macnaghten to deflect his indiscreet boss away from the real Jack. Okay, so Melville Macnaghten writes this memorandum where he is naming 3 suspects, yet when he is naming Montague John Druitt, J.J. Hainsworth is like, yeah, absolutely, that's the guy. He nailed it. He knew exactly what he was talking about. When he mentions a different suspect in the memorandum, Aaron Kosminski, oh no, he didn't really mean that. That's the red herring. So when the evidence fits your theory, it's true and it's credible. When the evidence goes against your theory, well, no, that's not real. That was intentionally fabricated to try and deceive people and pull them away from the truth. Okay, so I just don't like this type of thinking, and I'm really quite surprised that J.J. Hainsworth would do this in the book Jack the Ripper, Case Solved 1889, because the other sections of the book I thought were very well written. They were very thoughtful. Yeah, I said they were too gushy, and they were just a little bit too, speaking too favorably of Melville Macnaghten, almost in the fanboy type way, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they were poorly written. But this type of thinking here, I disagree with completely. I think it's impractical. I don't think it's objective. I don't think it's actually looking at the facts. I think it's trying to make convenient mental connections and jump through the loopholes and just trying to make everything fit. It's trying to provide excuses rather than reasons about how and why one's particular Jack the Ripper suspect was the person who committed these murders. But perhaps I'll come back to the book Jack the Ripper, Case Solved 1889 in the future. I just wanted to share that very, very brief segment. And this episode is really turning into a combination of different factors, because I would like to read a quotation that was shared on jacktheripper.org from Melville Macnaghten that I think is a lot more credible than some of the stuff about Montague John Druitt or these social discussions on the 5, the Forgotten 5. And this is Melville Macnaghten talking about Jack the Ripper again once he was an inspector on the case, saying, "The man, of course, was a sexual maniac, but such madness takes protean forms. Sexual murders are the most difficult of all for police to bring home to the perpetrators. For motives there are none, only a lust for blood, and in many cases a hatred of women. Not infrequently, the maniac possesses a diseased body, and this was probably so in the case of the Whitechapel murderer." One more time, that's Melville Macnaghten, and that quotation was found on jacktheripper.org. I was reading up more about Melville Macnaghten because there are all of these things about him in the book Jack the Ripper, Case Solved 1889, so I decided to read a different source. But in that respect, I think he hit the nail on the head. I think he was completely correct, and I think he really got to the point about Jack the Ripper, that one of the reasons why the Ripper case was not solved, I mean, It is because of the women, but it's because Jack the Ripper chose the female victims without a lot of strong personal connections to the best of our knowledge. Jack the Ripper chose the victims, and they didn't have a lot of specific meaning to him. He did this because of his overall hatred for women. He did this because of releasing rage. He may have done this because of some type of deranged mental illness. And in the book, Case Solved 1889, there's discussion about how after the murder of Mary Kelly, Jack the Ripper may have committed suicide. And yes, Montague John Druid does commit suicide 3 weeks after the Ripper's final murder. But I was just thinking, whoa, wait a second. Well, what if it's not Montague John Druid? What if somebody committed suicide the day after the murder of Mary Kelly, and then they were just never discovered? Their body was never found. Maybe they did it in a way that was extremely secretive. So I mean, I'm hearing, some type of reasonable explanation and some type of unreasonable explanation. There's a lot of stuff that is in that book by J.J. Hainsworth, although I do recommend it. I mean, give it a chance. It's not a book that I think is completely dismissive. I'm really just pulling out one paragraph that truly triggered me a little bit. But overall, though, I would like to just conclude this episode with one particular piece of information, because I was listening to the episode from Debunk File, and they played a reading of a poem by Charles Christopher Robinson. And this is the story of someone who was about to be executed. And Charles Christopher Robinson was set to be executed for the murder of Harriet Seeger in 1886, who was actually his lover. And I confess that this is not Jack the Ripper related, and I think they wanted to share this in the episode from Debunk File because they wanted to just give some context for the Victorian era. But this is called Verses on the Awful Execution of Charles Christopher Robinson. Come all, you feeling Christians, give ear unto my tale. It's for a cruel murder I was hung at Stafford jail. The horrid crime that I have done is shocking for to hear. I murdered one I once did love, Harriet Seeger dear. Charles Robinson it is my name, with sorrow was oppressed. The very thought of what I've done deprived me of the rest. Within the walls of Stafford jail in bitter grief did cry, and every moment seemed to say, poor soul, prepare to die. I well deserve my wretched fate, and no one can pity me. To think that in my cold blood could take her life away. She no harm had done, how could I serve her so? Oh, while within the dungeon dark and sad thoughts come apace, the cruel deed that I had done appeared before my face. While lying in my prison cell those horrid visions rise, the gentle form of her I killed appeared before my eyes. O Satan, thou demon strong, why didst thou know me bind? Oh, why did I allow my chains to enwrap my feeble mind? Before my eyes she did appear, all others to excel, and it was jealousy I poor Harriet Seeger killed. May my end be a warning unto all mankind. Think on my unhappy fate, and bear me in your mind. And whether you are rich or poor, your friends and sweethearts love, and God will crown your fleeting days with blessings from above. And this is Charles Christopher Robinson on the murder of Harriet Seeger, and it's called An Awful Execution. I think that could have easily been written by Jack the Ripper himself, pending that Jack the Ripper could have actually speak English. Now, I would love to know your thoughts on anything that was discussed in this episode. I know it started out with the intention of just talking about the 5, but then it went into a very, very different discussion because I wanted to do some follow-ups. And if you want to tune in for regular programs about Jack the Ripper, you can come every Wednesday for Ripper Wednesday. And it is the month of February now, but in March there will be a bonus episode every week here on Black Box Online Radio, available via the Black Box Online Radio membership. You hit that join button that is down at the bottom, and you can join the membership, which will give you access to 3 bonus episodes. The Cooper Profile, which is going to be talking about the D.B. Cooper case, True Crime Talk Radio in the morning on Tuesday, the Tuesday segment of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, which is a general true crime discussion where any subject is fair game, and the Double Event, which is going to be talking all about Jack the Ripper. And this actually got started because of Ripper Wednesday when I first had the idea to make these bonus episodes, because last year on the channel I was doing Ripper Wednesday, and I found this book review that was written by John J. Edelston where he was discussing Robert Graysmith's The Bell Tower. and I wanted to read the book review as a type of reference, and I just put it online, and it was only 9 minutes long, and I was thinking, I know this isn't going to be a full Ripper Wednesday, so I just called it the double event. Now that's going to be morphing into its own show. So you can tune in March for the double event, the Cooper Profile, True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, all by joining the Black Box Online Radio membership. One more time, you can hit the like button and subscribe if you want. You can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. You can get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook name is Ned DeHaan, and there is always BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram. And I will see you over there. Until next time.